I'm going to go ahead and read us today's Old Testament lesson. It is from Isaiah chapter 41, starting in the 17th verse. When the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue is parched with thirst, I, the Lord, will answer them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. I will open rivers on the bare heights, and fountains in the midst of the valleys. I will make the wilderness a pool of water, and the dry land springs of water. I will put in the wilderness the cedar, the acacia, the myrtle, and the olive. I will set in the desert the cypress, the plane and the pine together, that they may see and know, may consider and understand together, that the hand of the Lord has done this. The Holy One of Israel has created it. The word of the Lord.
Thanks be to God.
May the words of my mouth and the meditation of our hearts be always acceptable in the sight of our Lord, who is our rock and our Redeemer. Amen.
Amen.
Gardening. That word can bring up a lot of mixed emotions, I think. At least it does for me. I grew up in a house full of gardeners. My great-grandmother gardened, my grandmother gardened, my mom gardens. Caitlin and I are attempting to garden. And you know, there's a lot of good things that come out of gardening. It's real exciting when you put the seed in the ground and the little seedling comes up. It's just amazing how that works. And it continues to grow. And then you get vegetables, which aren't necessarily free because you're putting in time. You had to buy the seed. You had to work the dirt. But you know where they come from. And you can feel good about eating it. But then there's the other side of it. There's the side that we don't always get when we read on the internet and we look on Facebook and we see all these people gardening and we're like, oh, that's exciting. I want to do that. The work. You see, soil has to be just right for the seed to do well. I didn't understand that. At our house, we've been cultivating some old flower beds and we're revitalizing them to use for vegetables. They were full of old roots and stumps and just the remains of flowers and grass and weeds that had been left untended for probably a decade or two. And so we had to take out all of these things. Between Caitlin and I, we're cutting up roots and taking things out and taking out dirt full of grass and weeds, and that's hot. That's really hot work in the Texas heat. And so, hungry and thirsty. Hungry and thirsty is how that makes you feel. There's nothing better after that than to sit on the front porch or in the shade tree with a glass of lemonade or beer and a pimento cheese sandwich. That right there is refreshing. Well, hungry and thirsty, poor and needy, those are the words that Isaiah has for the people of Israel, starting in verse 17. That's pretty bleak. You see, Israel had fallen into sin. And this isn't the first time. We see it all throughout the Old Testament. A cycle of them falling into sin. Repenting, God raising up someone to help deliver them. And then the cycle begins all over again. So this is just one of many times of God's people falling into sin. They've been worshiping idols, carved images. They've been raising up Asherah poles. They've set up high places in Samaria, which are unauthorized idols to idolatrous gods. And child sacrifice was rampant, especially in Judah, in the south, with people burning their children. So God is going to let his people be exiled. Isaiah says that just in the few verses before this reading. They're going to be at the mercy of others. They're going to be poor and needy. They're going to be reliant on the Assyrians and then the Babylonians to basically care for them as their slaves. You know, when we look at today, we have a problem too in this COVID-19 pandemic. I think there's a lot of uncertainty that's going on right now. There's financial instability. Even for those of us who save, and manage our finances. There's unemployment. There's hunger and a loss of freedoms with people who are finding their churches closed by the government and no way in. God's people are finding themselves hungry and thirsty. And then ourselves, in our own Christian life, we struggle with sin. And our souls sometimes are barren and desolate in that environment. You know, today is Rogation Sunday. Today is traditionally the day when we would be blessing the fields. Now's the time in England and also here in this country where we're planting. We're planting our gardens, we're planting our crops for harvest. And that is so fitting for today. Because just like that soil, if we had left that soil and not worked it, the crops would have been destitute. They would have been poor and needy. They wouldn't have grown well if they'd grown at all. They would have been competing with all sorts of other things in that bed and choked out. So we had to tend to it so that the plants could thrive. And so Isaiah has a good message, very similar to that for us. Isaiah is sent proclaiming the news of the Messiah. And here in this reading, he is proclaiming God's promise to sustain his people. You see, to Israel, in verse 18 through 19, where Isaiah is talking about how God's going to open up rivers on the bare heights. He's going to make oases in the desert. He is telling the people of Israel that throughout the exile, he is going to sustain them. And eventually, as we know, as we go further in through the Old Testament, he raises up a remnant of his people to bring back to him. So too, I think that that's happening today. That God is raising up parts of his church again. That's exciting. There are so many people who have access to the gospel throughout this pandemic. I know a lot of us may have different feelings about online church and online sermons, and our hope and prayer has to be that the Holy Spirit will translate that back when we go back to normal, to public worship. But right now we need to be so excited that people have access, that they can hear the words of God. And then in our life, we have mountains and valleys. We have good times and bad times. We have times, I think, where we feel very near to the heart of God, and times where we may feel very away. And ultimately, we all know where life's journey ends, on our deathbed. And even there, God continues to sustain us, all the way up to our final reward. So just like working in that soil, and all of that work that we had to do so that our plants would thrive, God is continuing to grow and cultivate us ever closer to him. So ultimately, as we see in verse 20, that we may all know that he alone is the Lord. And all along the way, just like he did for the people of Israel, God continues to sustain us. Amen.
Amen.